Have you ever heard of a show called Avatar the Last Airbender? Yeah, me neither. I'm here to talk about the Mighty Bee. No, I'm just playing. Avatar the Last Airbender has been a pretty hot topic here on YouTube for the last year, mainly because of it being added to Netflix last summer, which led to a resurgence in popularity. OG fans started rewatching it, and people who had never seen it before watched it for their first time and quickly fell in love with it. It was the most watched show on Netflix for like the whole summer. Avatar the Last Airbender is a pretty big topic right now, and rightfully so. Avatar managed to tell a story about genocide and imperialism with centuries worth of backstory and lore, while making us care deeply about these characters and their individual journeys, as well as the overall journey that they were all on together. We could talk all day about what makes this show great, but today I want to talk about one of my favorite parts of Avatar the Last Airbender, the filler episodes.
Huh?
I know. Filler episodes aren't exactly the most popular thing in animation or any story show, but hear me out. So if you don't know, a filler episode is basically an episode of a show that doesn't contribute any major developments to the overall story of the show. Filler is very often used in anime. A big reason for this is because that animators usually have to create a large number of episodes for a network and need to create filler episodes to essentially fill up space and make more episodes. A lot of times, filler episodes can be used more for comedic purposes rather than being dramatic or contributing to the overall story. Usually an episode that can be skipped over without missing anything too important to the overarching plot. So, to put that in perspective, Avatar the Last Airbender's ultimate story is about Aang's quest to defeat the Fire Nation and bring peace to the world. Any episode that doesn't directly contribute to that story could be considered a filler episode. But the thing about Avatar is, the episodes that don't contribute directly to that main story almost always contribute to the character development of the main cast, which begs the question, if the episode is important for character development, is it really filler? I say yes. I stand by my opinion that if it doesn't directly contribute to the main plot, then it is a filler episode. You could still skip these episodes and understand exactly what's happening in the story with ease. But that being said, the filler episodes of Avatar the Last Airbender are good, and they add small elements to the characters that, while not 100% necessary for the overall story, definitely are helpful to the overall story and are useful in terms of the viewer understanding these characters that we see in every other episode. They're also used to subtly add weight to a future episode or event. A lot of people like to say that there's no filler episodes of Avatar the Last Airbender.
You know what the f*** call a filler episode for Avatar?
No, what?
Don't f*** call it nothing, because there's no such thing as a filler episode on Avatar.
And while I understand that point of view, I do think a lot of times that point of view is based on the idea that a filler episode has to be a bad thing. But I just don't believe that's true. I believe Avatar the Last Airbender has filler episodes, but that's not a bad thing because most of them are actually really entertaining, good, and do add some depth to the main story. So let's take a look at some of the best filler episodes of Avatar the Last Airbender. By the way, if you're not already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button for more cartoon content. This channel covers all kinds of animation from adult to children and everything in between. Everything from animation news to animation reviews, video essays, cool cartoon history lessons, you name it. So go ahead, subscribe. Go ahead, do it. Go ahead. One of my favorite filler episodes of Avatar, and a great example of how filler episodes can add depth to the show, The Painted Lady. The Painted Lady revolves around Katara disguising herself as the Painted Lady, the river spirit of the village, healing the sick people of the Fire Nation village and providing food while they sleep. Aang discovers the secret identity that Katara's been using, and they destroy the nearby factory that has been polluting the river, prompting soldiers to attack the village. Katara reveals herself as the Painted Lady, saves the villagers with the help of her friends, and is thanked by the real Painted Lady at the end. This episode is great. It contributes almost nothing to the overall main plot of the show, so it's definitely a filler episode. But it's one of the most powerful episodes of the entire series, and it does so much for Katara's character. We get to see how much Katara truly cares for other people and the heroic traits that she possesses. The reason the gang stayed in the village so many nights was because Aang believed Oppa was too sick to fly due to spots on his tongue. We later find out these spots were really just a result of Katara feeding him berries that stain his tongue. She did this purposely to deliver delay leaving the village, so she could continue helping the villagers. When the soldiers attack the village because of Katara's actions and Sokka tells her she should have just left and did nothing, Katara exclaims,
"The army's gonna blame the villagers. They're headed there right now to get revenge."
Well, what was I supposed to do?
Leave. Do nothing.
No! I will never, ever turn my back on people who need me.
The anger in this statement shows us how passionate she is about helping people. Aang's support of her mission to help the village further establishes how much he loves her. The fact that this is a Fire Nation village in this bad of shape was done by the writers to show the negative impact of the war, and how it even impacted the people of the Fire Nation, which serves as a huge reminder that while governments can be evil and corrupt, the citizens are often just as much the victims of that corruption as anyone else. The suffering of these people was a small detail in the grand scheme of the overall mission Team Avatar was on, but Katara refused to ignore this suffering, because like she said, she can never turn her back on people who need her. So while the events of this episode don't directly contribute to the story of Aang defeating the Fire Lord, it does contribute a lot to Katara's character, has some solid world building, and teaches some pretty important lessons along the way. Up next, The Runaway. The Runaway is about Aang and the gang having some money issues, so Toph uses her earthbending to scam Fire Nation civilians out of their money, much to the disapproval of Katara. Toph feels Katara is being too motherly, and it causes a rift between Team Avatar. Katara eventually tries to make up with Toph by helping her pull off a scam, but they're caught by Combustion Man. They are eventually freed as Katara's quick thinking saves the day. Later on, Toph sends a letter to her parents with Katara's help. This episode is huge for the development of Katara's character. She's being accused of acting too motherly, and after this we learn from Sokka that Katara has always been a mother figure to him since they lost their own mother. We learn that Katara wishes she could be a fun-loving kid like everyone else, and regrets being so motherly, but she can't help it. Katara being more responsible than the other characters is a direct result of her having to step into her mother's role for Sokka growing up. Also, after being accused of acting too motherly, Katara tells Toph she's only upset by this because she secretly misses her own parents, which angers Toph enough to walk out. We later find out this is true. When Katara tries to fight her motherly traits and fit in with Toph and be a troublemaker, it backfires and they get into trouble, which proves that her motherly traits are actually a great thing for Team Avatar, and much needed.
What do you think, Aang? Do I act like a mom?
Well,
Stop rubbing your eye and speak clearly when you talk.
Yes, ma'am.
And in the end, she doubles down on these traits by helping Toph write a letter to her parents. The episode helped to establish the group dynamic and essentially confirm Katara as the mother of the group, while also explaining why she acts that way. It also taught us more about Katara and Sokka's relationship and how much she truly means to him, while also giving Toph a better understanding of Katara and establishing that Toph has a soft side and actually misses her parents. The episode doesn't contribute too much to Aang defeating the Fire Nation, but it contributes a lot to the characters by his side, which makes the overall story a lot more intriguing. And now, one of the best filler episodes in television history. The Tales of Ba Sing Se. I know, I can already hear you in the comments now. That's not filler, it's good. It just is. Again, don't associate filler with being a bad thing, because yes, this episode is amazing, arguably the best episode of the series, but it's also proof that filler episodes can be great and can also be very useful to the overall story, even if not completely necessary. If it doesn't add directly to the overall story, then it's filler. I don't make the rules, people. That said, The Tales of Ba Sing Se might be the best episode of the entire series. The Tales of Ba Sing Se is a break from the previous dark, plot-heavy episodes, and instead is a collection of mini-stories showing what different characters have been up to in Ba Sing Se. There's a lot of great stories in this episode, but let's be honest, the most memorable one is Uncle Iros. This story has the power to make a grown man cry, and it has achieved this many times. This episode really shows how amazing of a human being Iroh really is. Up until this point, he'd shown glimmers of being a good guy, but it wasn't completely clear just how good he was. In this story, we see Iroh helping every single person he sees in one way or another. Literally everybody. He gives wisdom to some kids who accidentally break a window, sings a lullaby to a kid who won't stop crying, and even teaches a guy who tried to rob him the proper fighting stance, then proceeds to give him some life advice to send his life in a better direction. We see very clearly how much Iroh cares for other people, and how pure of a soul he has. And at the end of the story, a very emotional scene takes place, with Iroh singing a very special song, Little Soldier Boy, but this time with a picture of his son who was killed in battle, surrounded by candles. Iroh's son was killed on a siege that Iroh was responsible for, as general at the time. This is the first time we get to really see how deeply this situation has hurt Iroh. We see him crying his eyes out, and his voice is cracking while he's singing. This scene also takes place at the location where Iroh's son was killed. This made the audience empathize with Iroh even more than we already have. The way Iroh goes around helping everyone he sees shows how Iroh essentially acts as a father to every single person he meets. Then at the end we see how much he really misses the only person that he's actually a father to. This made the audience feel for Iroh on a much deeper level. Also, the fact that he's hurting as deeply as he is and still manages to keep such a peaceful demeanor with everyone he meets says a lot about the kind of person Iroh is. This helps with the world building as well, as it demonstrates the effects of war on yet another character. The war took a huge toll on the life of someone who was one of the most important people in the war. The effects of war on him would actually explain why he chooses to live a life dedicated to the opposite of war: peace. Drinking tea, helping people, resolving conflicts wherever he sees them. He was hurt. I recently read a comment that put it best. Iroh was trying to heal himself by healing the world. This completely establishes Iroh as a good person, which sets up greatly for him to become a protagonist down the line in the series. After the scene, there was a dedication to Iroh's original voice actor who passed away in 2006. I'm not completely sure how to pronounce his name, and I don't want to be disrespectful by mispronouncing it, so I'll put the name on the screen. But this song was actually written by him. It all just made the scene even more emotional and meaningful. Honestly, beautiful. The episode went a long way for character development and world building, although it didn't directly add any new developments to the overall story of Aang defeating the Fire Nation. So I do consider it a filler episode, but I also consider it one of the best episodes in animation history. And my final favorite filler episode, Appa's Lost Days. Again, one of the best episodes of the entire series. It's emotional, makes the viewer feel closer to Oppa, shows the effects of animal cruelty, and even won an award for that aspect, and is a great treat for the viewer, as we get to see exactly what Oppa has been up to since getting separated from Aang and Team Avatar. A beautifully written and executed episode, but it's definitely filler. There's not a single crucial plot point in the episode, so if you were to miss this episode, you'd be able to move along and understand the overall story just fine. So it's definitely filler, but also one of the best episodes of the entire show, and proof that filler episodes can be very good. The filler episodes of Avatar don't provide the story any width, but they do provide a lot of depth. Which is why I do understand the idea that these aren't filler episodes, as to a lot of people, if the episodes are at all helpful to the overall story, then they are not filler. I understand that completely, but to me the question of whether or not it's filler isn't whether or not it contributes at all, but whether or not it was completely necessary, and these episodes just weren't. What I consider a filler episode is any episode that could be skipped if you were trying to get the key details of the overall story. Episode you could skip without being out of the loop as to what's happening in the overarching plot. And while I love all of the episodes I just named, if you were to skip them, you wouldn't be confused as to what's going on in the show, as long as you've seen the key episodes that are very plot driven. But these episodes are all very important to the show in their own way. They add importance and depth to these characters and help the viewer understand these characters and allow the viewers to attach ourselves to them, which makes the actual story that much more enjoyable. They essentially add context to the story, whereas in the key episodes we see the characters doing things. These episodes help us to understand why each character does the things that they do. Those are my personal favorite filler episodes. I personally found Ember Island players to be boring, although it does contribute a lot to the Aang and Katara romance storyline, which in itself is one of the biggest plots of the show. There's also The Great Divide, an episode that gets a lot of hate online. I personally don't hate it, but it's definitely a slight dip in quality compared to the very high expectations the show has set for itself. but this is one filler episode I would say doesn't really contribute much to the character development or world building, to be honest. The Fortune Teller is a good episode as well, but serves more as a comedic episode rather than anything of depth or importance. You could make the argument that Zuko Alone is a filler episode. After all, it doesn't contribute much directly to the main story, but it is probably the best episode in terms of character development for Zuko. And considering how big of a part of the show Zuko's character is, I would have to say an entire episode devoted to us getting to know Zuko more isn't filler, but is rather a much needed episode. Again, I consider filler episodes you can skip and still understand the full story of the show, but I believe that if you skip this episode, you wouldn't understand Zuko nearly as well as you would have had you just watched it, which is very important to understanding the story. So yeah, this isn't filler. This is the same way I feel about the beach episode. On the surface, it feels like an episode about Zuko and Azula just going to the beach and finally acting like teenagers. Seems like a fun, laid-back filler episode. But this episode features so much emotional character development for his character, and this development is what actually led to his change of heart, which is one of the biggest plot points of the entire series. So like Zuko Alone, this episode is an example of the character development at times being too important to the overall story for the episode to be considered filler. Overall, Avatar the Last Airbender is a show that very rarely missed. So while there's a handful of episodes I consider to be filler because they don't directly add to the main story, I consider most of these episodes to be very important for adding context to the rest of the show. The character development in these episodes, along with the world building, adds context to the overall story that makes it that much easier to understand, and much more enjoyable as well. They're also just very good to watch and filled with moments of laughter, as well as moments of raw emotion. These episodes are responsible for the emotional attachment that we have to these characters, and without them, the show wouldn't be nearly as magical or memorable. So I am willing to say, Avatar the Last Airbender does have filler episodes, but it's some of the best filler you'll ever see in your life. But what do you think? Do you think Avatar the Last Airbender has filler episodes? Sound off in the comments, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to Toon Fridge for more cartoon content. Now let's talk about the Mighty Bee.